Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Sorry for the delay. I know we started and then dropped out and all that. I was having some issues. I needed to update my PC. Didn't realize started it and it was terrible. So I had to reset everything. But welcome back. It's Friday. So that's always good. It's Friday. That's why I'm slightly blitzed on margaritas. Hello. Slightly blitzed off the margarita. Dad made margaritas, so we're loose over here. The rum, the tequila has been flowing, so we're feeling good. Heading into the weekend, starting off strong. Heyo, hello everyone. You don't have to be jealous. You can make your own margaritas. Actually, you probably don't have tequila, if I know you. Make a wine margarita if you have wine. It's the same as a regular margarita, except you mix the grape wine with the lime juice. It's great. It's two flavors that go so well together. But so is the screen easier to see? Like is it not so blurry anymore? Because if so, great success. If not, that's a lot of hard work gone to waste. It's not hard work. It was changing one setting that I thought I changed like 4 weeks ago, but I guess I didn't. Let's go. There's nothing more disheartening. Well, there's a lot more things there's a lot of things more disheartening than this. But Wednesday I thought went great. I was off the cuff a little more than usual, things were going good. And then I pull up the replay to upload it to YouTube and I can't read a thing on there. And it was so disheartening cuz I thought, this went so well. I feel like I'm really figuring it all out and then everything is just blurry. Thought I had taken my contacts out or something. It was bad. But I'm glad I figured it out. I figured it out. Now it works. It's the way it's supposed to be. Yeah, so I did zero research, to kind of. I didn't look back through what we read on Wednesday at all. I know we talked about Clovis. I know there was this sentence right here that I still need to get framed on my wall that made, zero sense. Awesome. I know it was about some of the more specific barbarian leaders, Clovis, Theodoric. There was one of the main sections was about Theodoric, the Ostrogoth ruler of Italy. I would have done a little bit more research looking back, but I have not had time. I've been a busy man. Working 2 jobs for the same company, and my boss is out of office today. So had a lot going on. Had people over yesterday, so I didn't have time yesterday to look into it. But we don't really need to. But this now we're getting to some of the good stuff. Not that the previous chapter was bad, but Justinian's a very interesting time period. The last great Eastern Roman Empire emperor, that is. If I start slurring my words, it is the wine and margaritas talking. I also need more time to get more maps. I'm running low on maps. I keep having to pull up the same ones. And it's very disappointing. Because I like maps. I don't know if y'all knew that. But I like maps. Make sure Dropbox is running on my PC. Yeah, it's running on my PC. Do I have to pull it up on... Can't access half of my maps because of something or other. Give me 1 second. All right, that's not worth it. Well, yeah, we'll forget about the maps for now. Well, if I remember I have an applicable map that I can actually access, I will pull it up. Oh, no, not that map. That map is not applicable. But I guess we will get into it. Part 2, The Triumph of Justinian. Chapter 4, Constantinople. The center of Constantinople was the Augusteum, a spacious marble-paved square, which in general effect must have resembled the Piazza San Marco at Venice. On the north side arose the dome of St. Sophia. On the east were the porticos of the Senate House, while on the south side a low building with heavy iron gates formed the entrance to the palace. Beyond this stood the lofty walls of the Kathisma, a structure whose upper stories, looking out on the hippodrome on the opposite side, formed a royal box for the emperor and communicated directly with the palace buildings by galleries and a spiral staircase. In the square, besides the milestone, a vaulted monument from which started all the roads of the empire, stood a tall bronze column bearing a colossal equestrian statue of Justinian in full armor, holding the orb of the universe, his hands stretched towards the east, as if commanding the barbarians of Asia not to pass their frontiers. The Messe, or Middle Street, lined with arcades, statues, and sumptuous palaces, led westwards from this square along the peninsula to the Golden Gate, a fortified entrance after the Roman style in the massive walls which ran across the isthmus. Seen from the Bosporus, the vast palace enclosure, which included the slopes between the Augusteum and the shore, was dotted with groups of gilded domes, white pavilions, baths, terraces, and chapels, set among trees and fountains and connected by flights of marble steps. The main entrance to the palace led from the Augusteum to a large domed hall, decorated with mosaics displaying the wars and triumphs of Justinian. Behind it was the throne room and stairs led up. Behind it was the throne room, and stairs led up from this to the palace of the Daphne, to the palace of Daphne, with its airy terraces and chambers looking out across the blue waters to the snowy summits of the Bithynian mountains. Several other imperial residences existed, not only in this quarter, but outside the city and on the Asiatic shore. The group formed by Palace Square Cathedral and Hippodrome was the setting for many pageants and crises in the life of the capital. On New Year's Day, if the emperor had deigned to accept the consulship, they saw the house fronts gay with carpets, silken streamers waving from poles, the square filled with wooden hustings, crowded by the ranks of the city corporations and circus factions. Within the palace, the emperor received the homage of the Senate and the panegyrics of the orators, bestowing in return baskets full of gold pieces, silver cups, or ivory diptychs carved with his portrait. Then the gates opened, and marshaled by heralds, the long procession of functionaries, courtiers, and guards filed across the square into the cathedral, where, in a blaze of candles, the emperor offered his gifts at the high altar and received a benediction, before proceeding in triumph to the capital. This was but one of many such ceremonies. Often they were confined to the court, as when the emperor held his solemn audiences (silentiae) to confer dignities or promotion, or received Caucasian and Herul princes, or envoys from Persia and Abyssinia. Then the full splendor of Byzantine ceremonial was displayed. The little group of foreigners, guided by permanent officials appointed for this purpose, moved slowly between the lines of tall soldiers, through serried rows of golden shields and helmets, scarlet plumes, and flashing spears, till they halted before the ivory doors of the entrance chamber. A long wait ensued. Suddenly the curtains were flung back, and a brilliant tableau was revealed. The emperor enthroned between the two victories, surrounded by white-clad guards with gold collars. The senators and high officials in their silk robes ranged about him. After a threefold prostration, the leader of the embassy was permitted to present his gifts to the emperor before being dismissed with a few gracious words. Until the end of their stay, the envoys would be sumptuously entertained and shown carefully the more impressive sights of the city. Interesting look into the Byzantine ceremonial of emperorship. This is interesting to me. A threefold prostration. That's similar to the way that you greet the Pope. At least I don't know if it's the same now as it was, 50 or 100 years ago. But typically there's three genuflections before the Pope, if I remember correctly. They're not prostrations. That's not what happens, but I'm pretty sure there are three genuflections of some sort when you have when you are going to greet the Pope. I could be wrong there, but I seem to remember that being something that happens. So it is interesting. There I go saying again. To me, it's interesting because as I've said before, the Byzantines, to some degree, for a good bit of their lifetime before the schism, were Caesaropapists. The Caesar was the Pope to some extent for some periods of time, and so it is interesting that there's a similar ceremonial for the emperor as there was to the Pope. Of course, I'm not sure when this ceremony for the Pope came into being. Probably doesn't. This ceremony for the emperor probably predates the ceremony for the Pope. But it is an interesting, blanking on the word. It's not coincidence, but you get what I mean. Similarity. If St. Sophia, it has been said, belonged to God, and the palace to the emperor, the hippodrome was the property of the people. It formed the axis of Byzantine life, even as its orientation had determined that of both church and palace. Here, the last liberties of the Roman people were expressed in the shouts of the circus factions, demanding from their ruler the redress of grievances or the downfall of an unpopular minister. I wonder what they mean by circus factions, because obviously we know a circus as, traveling entertainers. I wonder what kind of. It's probably a similar meaning, but it's probably a slightly different. A circular arena surrounded by tiers of seats and often covered by a tent. Okay, never mind. That's just what a circus is. Circus factions. It's the circus is the people. The circus is the circular square. It's not a square, it's a circus. And that is. Chat is delayed? Yeah, probably. It's probably a good 20 to 30 seconds behind. But the circus is the circular center of the town. And the circus factions are those people who set up shop or not reside, but they conduct their business there. That's as far as I know. They're not talking about a traveling circus, they're not talking about elephants and trapeze artists. Political factions that reside and do business in the city square. Here, the conquered Vandals of Africa, or in later times the Mohammedan Arabs, were led around in triumph and forced to prostrate themselves before the emperor, while the hippodrome rang with hosannas and songs of victory. Here, too, on occasion, took place the execution or mutilation of enemies of the state. The central area of the hippodrome, divided down the middle by a row of obelisks and columns, was surrounded by rising tiers of white marble seats, holding more than 60,000 spectators. At the far end, the huge curving structure was raised upon massive arcades above the lower slopes. In the center of the long south side stood the Kathisma, the lofty building on which the emperor ventured forth from his palace, as on a projecting pier, into the angry sea of the populace. The imperial box with its adjoining rooms was raised high above the reach of stones or storming mobs. Footnote, it could however be entered by stairs from the hippodrome, as the Nika riot shows. Nika. Nika. That is what is being said here. Below it, on a balcony, were guards and musicians. The rectilinear end, which was both goal and starting point for the charioteers, was formed by tiers of stone boxes occupied by the aristocracy of Byzantium. Okay, so it kind of is a circus. Entertainment. It is an entertainment center. So I guess both are kind of correct. I guess entertainers had a lot of power back then too, or a lot of influence. Below were the chambers fitted with barriers from which the chariots burst forth down the course, wheeling sharply round the meta, the monument which marked its farther end, to dash back along the other side of the central axis or spina, under the shouting ranks of frantic onlookers. The open spaces and arcades around the hippodrome were filled with obelisks and famous statues, transferred from Rome or torn from the cities of Greece, Egypt, and Asia Minor, whose glory they had been. Some of these were the vulgar colossi beloved of the late empire. Some were the dignified equestrian figures of Roman emperors. Others were of the purest Hellenic style, a few of the actual handiwork of such sculptures as Phidias and Lysippus. Don't know if I said that right. The superstitious populace of the Middle Ages gave them magic powers and read the secrets of the future in the hieroglyphics of the Egyptian stelae. Yes, the superstitious populace. Although in Byzantium, that might be true. Them Greeks, man, they might be a little superstitious. The Frankish crusaders melted down the bronze for coin. Let's go. But one of them was moved with compassion for the melancholy, dreaming Hercules and the loveliness of Helen's beauty. Shout out the Fourth Crusade. Her mouth, half open like a flower, seemed to speak. Her enchanting smile ravished the soul of him who beheld her. But who could portray her deep eyes, the curve of her brow, the grace of her delicious body? Okay. From the upper porticos of the Hippodrome, the eye ranged over the clear waters of the Sea of Marmora on the south, covered with the sails of the shipping of 3 continents, and beyond them the groves and country houses and the far mountains of Asia Minor. Eastward lay the cupolas and terraced gardens of the palace, the narrow strait, and the houses and churches on its farther side, and in the foreground the Augustaeum, backed by the great dome of St. Sophia. To the north, the roads and squares, the aqueducts and triumphal arches of the city, the shining roofs of countless churches, and high bronzed pillars with spiral friezes, rising above the serried housetops, led the eye onwards to the line of square towers and massive walls and the open country that lay beyond. All these attractions, however, counted for nothing beside the frenzy of the contest between greens and blues. The circus parties were an inheritance from the early empire. They were now in every great city of the East the most important fact in the city of its excitable populace. Fact as in faction. Every citizen was a member of one of the factions, which sat on opposite sides of the hippodrome, wearing their blue or green colors, praying passionately to the saints for the victory of their party, or shrieking insults at the opposing ranks. All the civic patriotism, all the local loyalties of race and class, all the venom which had in early days fomented the Greek Stasius, those internecine I'm guessing that just means internal. Of or relating to struggle within a nation, organization, or group. Mutually destructive, ruinous, or fatal to both sides. Those internecine party struggles of the city-state now flowed into this curious channel. Even the arts were affected. Statues and epigrams celebrated the beauty and prowess of those darlings of the publics, the charioteers. The cosmopolitan mobs of Antioch or Constantinople cared less for the victory of Roman arms on distant frontiers than for the triumph of green or blue. It is difficult to trace any real political or religious antagonism between the strife of parties. Crazy. Hashtag relatable. Go sports ball. Hate even saying that. I like sports. Sports are fun. Baseball's fun. But if they are the entire center of your life, you need to get your priorities straight. They're a good pastime. You do need some kind of entertainment every once in a while. They're not bad. But everything in moderation. If your entire life revolves around sports, you need to figure something else. But they're fun. I like baseball. I'm going to see a baseball game this weekend. Horse racing is fun. I like horse racing. Probably going to see some horse racing a couple weeks from now. Horse racing is also fun. Yeah, football's fun. I like sports, but I'm not. And it's just personal. I don't watch them all that much. I don't get all that into it. I do the fantasy football. That's fun. Really, the only way I care about the NFL. But it is, it is interesting. It's kind of a consistent thing. The sports typically hold the public attention. Bread and circus, bread and circuses are how you control a society. Something like that. Where was I? Ah, yes. Accusations of heresy and treachery, of witchcraft or immorality were scattered indiscriminately by both sides. They were merely the current coin of Byzantine abuse. But the dangerous Freemasonry, which linked up the blue or green parties of the great cities of the empire, and the passions aroused by the chariot races, which might culminate in a sudden riot, if not a revolution, made the circus factions a powerful force in politics. In the interests of the state, careful organization was necessary. At the head of each party were numerous officials elected by a sort of jockey club, composed of some hundreds of wealthy men, whose subscriptions supported the training establishments, and in addition to the racing, provided the bear baiting and acrobats for the intervals. Bear baiting? Let's hold on. Maybe I do like circuses. I do like circuses, but bears? I want a pet bear. I wish I was Russian. I wish I was Russian and I had the purity of soul for a bear to be my friend. I really think a bear hug from an actual bear could fix me. I really think that. Sometimes it would definitely make life a lot more bearable. These officials had special privileges and duties in the court ceremonies, especially those connected with imperial births and marriages, and were responsible also for keeping order in the hippodrome. Their followers formed a guard of honor in state processions, and the bands of the citizen militia, which policed the capital and defended the various portions of the walls allotted to them, were closely connected with the party organizations. The strangest feature of all, though not without Roman precedent, is that the emperor himself belonged to a faction, and the result was that while one party was favored and allowed to murder or terrorize its opponents, or to form bands of Mohawks, fantastically dressed, whose outrages made the streets of the capital unsafe, in the other were concentrated, at a crisis, all the elements of opposition to the reigning house, personal or religious, racial or dynastic, kindled, perhaps, by the final sparks of Greek democracy, flickering out in a world which knew only absolutism. No Russian bear sniper wife. I know, but hey, we are getting a new one, Metro 2039. It's going to be fantastic. Metro Exodus, one of the greatest games ever made, just because you do get a Russian wife who likes you, you get a Russian wife who adores you. Great game. There's also zombies. It's great. But as we were talking about Byzantium, it is interesting the power that it's like if the NFL commissioners could influence politics. It's almost like it would be crazy if people running like the entertainment industries or whatnot could, affect government policy. That would be insane. I'm really happy that doesn't happen nowadays, because that would be crazy. Hey, can you imagine that if you had all these dumb, like for instance, like if all these dumb Hollywood people could influence what the president thought, or the people who affected the president, the people who had the president's ear. That would be crazy. That would be crazy if the general populace cared more about what their favorite actor or artist had to say rather than, someone like the church or something like that. Someone who knows better. Would be wild. Anastasius had favored the Greens, but Justin and Justinian reversed this policy. While his position was still uncertain, Justinian's partiality for the Blues had gone to all lengths, and even the courts of justice had been corrupted by party feeling. So this is kind of like the first two-party system almost. Except obviously there's no elections. You don't elect the emperor, but it is similar to kind of the same general idea, kind of the same concept, just a lot bloodier apparently. I don't know. By the beginning of 532, he felt more secure, and orders were issued to the great cities that disorders of either faction should be put down. The city prefect of Byzantium had consequently decreed the execution of 7 Greens and Blues convicted of murder in a recent disturbance. Unfortunately, the rope broke twice. 2 of the condemned men were rescued by an indignant crowd, and both parties petitioned the emperor for a reprieve. When this was refused, the parties united, and with the watchword Nika, really working extra to pronounce that K, Nika, conqueror, the Green Blues began the famous rising, which is known as the Nika Riot. That K is working overtime. In a few days, the movement developed a more serious character. The buildings around the Augusteum were set on fire. The country folk, enraged by ruinous taxation, joined in the fray, and the faction riot became a popular rising. Demand was made for the deposition of the 3 most unpopular ministers. Alarmed at the disorder, Justinian complied and even appeared in person in the Kathisma, swearing on the Gospels to grant redress and amnesty. But it was too late. He retired into the palace, followed by jibes and insults. Jibes? Gibbs? The popular rising had now become a revolution. Various nobles who had always hated the upstart house of Justin were backing the rioters, and a nephew of Anastasius was crowned emperor. A nephew of Anastasius was crowned emperor against his will and conducted to the Kathisma by the excited mob which swarmed into the hippodrome. The position of the real emperor, besieged in his palace, seemed desperate. The loyalty of the senators, apart from his own creatures, was doubtful. The guards were wavering, and he could count only on the personal retainers and barbarian troops of 2 of his generals. A hurried council took place, and Justinian prepared for flight. The situation was saved by Theodora, whose famous speech, even in the Thucydidean garb, which Procopius had given to it, has an authentic ring. Though safety should lie only in flight, yet will I not flee. Those who have sworn a crown should never survive its loss. Never will I live to see the day when men no longer hail me as empress. Escape then, if you will, Caesar. You have money. The ships await you. The sea is unguarded. As for me, I stay. I hold with the old proverb which declares that the purple is a fair winding sheet. Go off, queen. You go, girl. Vigorous action followed. The Blues were to be bribed to desert the Greens. Meanwhile, the 2 loyal generals had forced their way into the hippodrome by different gates, and an appalling massacre ensued. More than 30,000 dead were left lying there when night ended the slaughter. The unhappy nephews of Anastasius were promptly put to death. Justinian was too frightened to spare them, and several of the nobles were banished. The measures taken, though not vindicative, were sufficient to ensure that there would be no repetition, either from senators or circus factions, of the activities which had so nearly deprived the ruler of his throne. While his position was thus actually strengthened, on the ashes of the ruined quarter, extending from the Forum of Constantine to the palace gates, there rose a magnificent series of buildings, crowned by the great church, which, together with the legislative code which bears his name, constitutes the most lasting monument of Justinian. Hmm. Well, you riots were a lot more dangerous back then. You actually the government would actually deal with a riot. Doesn't say what actually happened to Anastasius. I imagine he was pardoned, but that his nephews were nephews died, but I wonder what happened to Anastasius. Let's see. Let us see. No, I don't care about Anastasius the First. So, So apparently there was a red faction, according to Google, but oh well, yeah, something I can look into later. He might have been fine. But we don't know. That's the problem. We don't know. The Nika riots. Saint Sophia, also known as the Hagia Sophia. I think that's how you pronounce that. Saint Sophia, the Church of the Holy Wisdom, has been acknowledged ever since that day to be, in the words of Sir John Mandeville, the fairest church in all the world. Procopius rises to its description in a noble passage, and Paul the Silenciary, a distinguished courtier and poet, in the hexameters composed for the reopening of the edifice by Justinian, has fused poetic imagery and exact architectural detail into a glowing picture. Ethereal lightness was the main impression given by the building. The dome appeared to be hung from the sky, and all the parts were surprisingly joined to one another in the air, suspended one from another, and resting only on that which is next to them. This effect was produced by the daring semi-domes which supported the great central cupola on east and west, and by the admirable proportions of the whole, and was increased by the light and sunshine poured into the church through 40 windows in the dome, and by the soft radiance of the many-colored marbles which clothed the walls and floor. Cloistered courts and fountains formed the approach. When the double narthex with its 9 doors was passed, the whole length of the building became visible. The square central space, with its dome resting on 4 massive piers, rising like sheer cliffs, was flanked by the 2-storied arcades behind, which were the seats of the members of the court, the upper story, with delicate latticed grilles, being reserved for women. Beyond this space stood the ambo, rising like an island of ivory and silver from swirling seas of marble, streaked with deep green or glowing red, powdered with gold stars, or splashed with milky streams on glittering black, or, like blue cornflowers in grass, with here and there a drift of fallen snow. The eastern end was formed of 3 apses. I don't know how to pronounce words. The central one contained the sanctuary, shut off by a great silver iconostasis, on which stood figures of martyrs and pairs of winged angels with bowed heads. The altar was of pure gold, hung with silken figured curtains, and both the pyramidal ciborium which surmounted it and the curving tribunes beyond it for the patriarch and his clergy shone with silver, elaborately worked. At night, hundreds of perfumed lamps in clusters or shaped to resemble silver ships or crowns lit up every part and shone even through the openings in the dome, forming a beacon for the sailor entering the adverse currents of the Hellespont, and anxiously awaiting with taut forestay the onslaught of a storm from Africa. In St. Sophia, purely Christian architecture reaches its highest point. The abstract theology of the East has found its incarnation in stone. Whoever enters there to worship perceives at once that it is not by any human strength or skill, but by the favor of God, that this whole work has been perfected. The mind rises sublime to commune with God, feeling that he cannot be far off, but must especially love to dwell in the place which he has chosen. It's almost it's a little difficult to read about the Hagia Sophia because it's a mosque now. 1453, Ottoman Turks take over take over Constantinople, and it becomes a mosque. Come on, why aren't you cooperating? Like, it hurts to see the texts of the Quran in it. But look at that. That is gorgeous. What is worse. Well, the other, I hate seeing all the, obviously the Islamic stuff in it, but the fact that the Turks will claim it, they'll say, oh yeah, the Hagia Sophia is ours. It's like, no, man. That is a Catholic building. That ain't no mosque. That was built by the Byzantines. That wasn't built by no Ottomans. Like, look at that. It's definitely the greatest church built in the East. That is just fantastic. Such an incredible church. And it's just devastating that it's a mosque. I wish there was like a Google Maps, but for the inside of churches. Because there's a book I want to read where a lot of it is Chartres Cathedral, Chartres, or however you pronounce it. And he talks a lot about the inside of the church. And I would love if there was just like a Google Maps, but for the inside of the church or the outside, you can go around and see everything about it. But this is one of the Yep. To me, this Chartres is one of the pinnacles, the pinnacle, in my opinion, of Gothic, of the Gothic architecture. They do. I need to look into that because I need better pictures of Chartres. Now that is just such a beautiful church. What? Strasbourg is the one I've been to when I went to Europe. Can we get a good picture of the front of it, please? Yeah, this is a fantastic church too. It has a clock inside of it. It is the oldest working clock in the world. It still works. It was built in, I think, the 1400s. Do it? I don't know. I'm not paying much attention to panoramic. Well, here's... I don't know. We'll look at some cathedral, well, I'll look into the 3D views of them a little later, and we'll revisit this. But Strasbourg has the oldest working clock in the world, I think. It was built in, I think, the 1400s. Built in the 1400s, and there is, I think, there's 3 people in the world who can actually work on the clock, who can tune it. But it's very interesting. Here, let's actually... I don't know how to type. Yeah, here it is. Show me the clock. Here it is. Yeah, it still works. You have the figures up here who they rotate around. It's a kind of a rotating assembly. As the clock turns, you have figures up here who rotate around. But the entire thing still works. Built, let's see, 14th century. Current clock was built 1842. But there's only like 3 or 4 people who live in Strasbourg who know how to work on it. But we'll go into a little more depth on some cathedrals later. Well, you have to live in Strasbourg, Germany, and you have to be descended from the person who built the clock. So it's not a very wide job market. All right, let's see. I'm gonna read one more section and then probably call it there. All right. As its dome, like a watchtower, rose high above the city, so the great church overshadowed in importance the countless other edifices which came into being at this time. Among these, the Church of the Holy Apostles, with its tombs of the emperors, was hardly inferior to St. Sophia in lavish decoration, and is also of interest as having been the model from which St. Mark's at Venice was taken. All through the empire, buildings of every description, many of striking and original design, were being erected, aqueducts and cisterns in Mesopotamia, stone bridges where the roads of Asia Minor crossed over the mountain torrents, baths and fountains in Syria, huge fortresses on the African frontier, walled monasteries on Mount Sinai, and churches all around the Mediterranean, and along the Adriatic shores to Parenzo and Ravenna. Byzantine influence was, in the following century, to become predominant even at Rome, and while its architecture can be seen from the domes of Peregu to the cupolas of Kiev, from the Aachen, we're just going to call it Aachen of Charlemagne to the oases of Upper Egypt, its types of ornamental motives and its typical presentation of sacred events and personages spread even farther, carved by ivories, textiles, and miniatures to Ireland, Northumbria, and Germany. Aix-la-Chapelle is Charlemagne's palace. Pretty sure it's Aix. Aix? Something like that. But it's in Aachen. That's where Charlemagne's palace was and his chapel. His church. The origins of Christian art have been hotly debated, not without religious and patriotic bias. The question has recently taken a new form. The old antithesis of Orient oder Rom has been given up and methods of approach have altered owing to the enormous increase of material brought forward for comparison. Broadly speaking, the changes of these centuries are seen no longer as a catastrophic flood washing away all landmarks, but rather as the manifold interlacing tributaries and currents in a continuous stream, whose importance is to be gauged by the momentum with which they surge through old channels. The forms, no less than the spirit, of Christian art had their sources in the East, but it was not the first appearance of Oriental influence. Nile and Orontes had for centuries past poured their waters into the Tiber. Alexandria, the center of Hellenistic traditions of modeling, ornament, and ideal presentation of the human form, was the place of origin, for instance, of the Roman house decoration, which is reflected in the catacombs. Antioch, representative of the realistic Semitic style, behind which lay the great traditions of the figure sculptors of Babylon and Assyria, became prominent when Christianity was made the state religion, and Christian art changed its character to suit the new conditions. The simple gaiety and pathos of the catacomb frescoes, the playing cupids, the anchor, fish, and dove, the suppliant figures, and Orphic symbols of rebirth were replaced by the awe and grandeur of historical and dogmatic scenes. Christ was no longer a graceful Greek youth or a shepherd carrying a lamb, but a divine king ruling his oriental court among the clouds, or a dolorous, bearded Semitic figure sharing the sufferings of the countless martyrs whose legends were depicted in full detail along the walls of the basilicas. Constantine's famous buildings, especially those at Jerusalem, influenced both structure and decoration of the churches, which were rising in every province, and miniatures, ivories, and pilgrim souvenirs disseminated through the West those types and figures, picturing, for instance, the various apostles, the days of creation, or the parallels between Old and New Testaments, which formed the subject matter of medieval art. Behind these twin influences of Antioch and Alexandria lies a third, older and more mysterious, the importance of which it has been the great achievement. Why are you throwing Slavic names at me? I can't pronounce French names. Why are you throwing Slavic names at me, please? Why? The great achievement of Strzalski to display the far-spread tradition of the Asiatic nomad cultures with its surface patterns, its formal designs of vine tendrils, flowers and animals, its abstract, non-representational character. Let me reread that without the Slavic name. Behind these twin influences of Antioch and Alexandria lies a third, older, and more mysterious. The far-spread tradition of the Asiatic nomadic cultures. Oh, you're missing a word here. Lies a third, older, A third, older and okay, no, I'm just reading it wrong. I'm just bad at reading. Behind these twin influences of Antioch and Alexandria lies a third, older and more mysterious. The far-spread tradition of the Asiatic nomad cultures, with its surface patterns, its formal designs of vine tendrils, flowers, and animals, its abstract, non-representational character. Yeah, I just don't know how to read. That's my issue there. Just as the nomad folk, suddenly appearing from the unchanging steppes of Asia at all periods of history, have left their mark upon the countries which they overran, so their artistic influence has made itself felt at the hands of Scythians, Turks, and Arabs. And at this time, especially through the median of northern Persia, footnote, the Sasanian figure art of the southern district was derived from Mesopotamian and Hellenistic sources. It was exercised largely upon Armenia, one of the oldest seats of Christianity, with flourishing bishoprics, churches, and monasteries. Both Syrian and Coptic art were profoundly affected by these Asiatic forms, and through them the West, but they penetrated more directly by other routes. The Goths sojourned for a time in the steppes of South Russia, long enough to acquire a taste for the somber, formal jewelry and the interlacing ornament of Iranian type, which in their subsequent wanderings they spread over North Italy, West Germany, France, and Spain, where the style developed among Visigoth, Merovingian, and Lombard, and can be traced, for example, in the grotesque animals of certain Romanesque sculpture. Merovingians are the Franks, by the way. The Merovingian line is the Frankish kings before Charlemagne's line. Technically before Charlemagne's father, Pepin, becomes the first Carolingian king of France. He displaces the Merovingians. It may be that its abstract form appealed to the kindred tastes of the northerners, just as in Ireland, which lacked a figure art. The introduction of Christianity was soon followed by the appearance of Eastern ornamental motifs, which combined readily with the whirls and triumphs of Celtic patterns into the complicated designs of the Book of Kells. The Iranian artist, if he used forms of men, animals, or plants, employed them only as constituent parts of a decorative design, as in a Persian carpet. His designs were flat. There was little or no sense of modeling or perspective, either in painting or sculpture. Degrees of distance were represented by placing the figures in zones one above the other, and bright colors were laid side by side without gradation of tone. His ideal was a continuous pattern, marked out by opposing tints or alternating light and shade, rather than a symmetrical scheme leading the eye up to some central point. The art of the Scythians and that of the later Turco-Mongolian peoples have the same peculiarities. When we look at the change which came over Christian art and contrast the cool Roman basilicas, their bare surfaces and ordered structure, their strongly molded relief and deeply cut capitals, with the rich and glowing churches of this time, with the brilliant coloring of mosaic and fresco, the flat, sharp-edged figures of processing martyrs, the covering of every surface with arabesque design, punctured ornament of or marbled latticework, the impost capitals like blocks of frozen lace. It is not difficult, even without recourse to the evidence of architectural forms, of ivories and miniatures, to realize the significance of this third aspect of Byzantine art. That might be the longest sentence I have ever read. It made sense. It made a lot more sense than that last really long, weird sentence. All right, here. Yeah, that is one sentence. That is a paragraph, but it's just one sentence. Yeah, we're going to stop reading there. But it is interesting. I like these deep dives into how these cities and such were set up. it's good stuff. You know, you gotta have context for what you're studying, and these are good for that. They can seem boring, but they definitely have their place. So once you get the background for this, it makes studying about Justinian make more sense. It makes what comes next make more sense. That's why he spent an entire chapter discussing what Roman civilization was, what that contained, what the barbarian civilization was. It helped you get a better understanding of the invasions and the effects that the barbarians have on the Romans. Compare and contrast the cultures. It adds context to the invasions and everything that comes afterwards. Yeah, you got to set the scene properly. And so these sections seem boring, but they're important. They're good. Not too much left in the chapter. 94. Oh, yeah, we just got five pages left. I would finish it, but my voice is not having fun reading anymore. Yeah, so but we're making progress. It was about 10 pages. But so that's about it for me. I will we'll be back on Wednesday. But I'm definitely going to look into what y'all were saying about the 3D looks at the cathedrals, because that's always something I've been interested in, because cathedrals are interesting. But my brain ain't working properly, so I'm gonna sign out, and so I don't say anything stupid. But don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, leave a comment, all that good stuff. I will follow me on Twitter. I don't post there much anymore, but I need to. But I will try to. When I find the time, I will start posting on Twitter more. But good. So yeah, good night. I will see y'all on Wednesday.